All right, so here we are. Just saying to Steve, this is our 5th annual exposing of Satan and its occultic holiday, Halloween. And so we just finished up sort of a 5-week study of the book of Revelations chapter 13. And so, you know, some churches go through the whole book in 5 weeks or whatever. But not us, man. You guys are going to get meat. You're going to get your money's worth. Not your paying, but if you were, you'd be happy. You'd be satisfied.
5 weeks, maybe.
I know you don't want to see listeners out there. First, like, oh, he's taking money on the side, man. He's got his Learjet on order from Bombardier or whatever.
Heating up.
No, so but yeah, so you know, we've been doing this since 2012. It's the first time that I did the Halloween teaching in its present form, and it was actually on Halloween night down on South Beach, Monarch Terrace, down there,
which is now completely level, and they're about to start some kind of $63 million development, like this one thing.
So yeah, so we did that, and we kind of developed it each year. But it's important to point out the satanic roots of Halloween because, as you were saying a little earlier, Ben, is that Halloween is now, you know, rivaling Christmas as one of the, you know, biggest money makers for the commercial industry in America. You know, sales and all of that. You know, Christmas sales, you know, are usually very high, but Halloween is right up there with it. And you know, I've said before that only Christmas and the porn industry compete with Halloween in terms of merchandising profits. And so there's money to be made, but more importantly, behind all of the masks and the candy and all of that is really the outplaying of an ancient satanic ceremony that gives glory to the devil and gives power to the demons and the fallen angels that sort of derive their energies from human beings, the sons of Adam. We have the life force that we received when we were created in the image of the living God, and God breathed his nefesh into us, and we became a living being. And so I think the reason why we see in the New Testament the incidences of demon possession and the like, where these disembodied spirits, which I have opined in times past, are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim that were killed by God in the flood. The Nephilim were the offspring of, remember back in the day, you know, the angels came down to earth and engaged in sexual relations with women and created this hybrid race of humanoids that the Bible refers to collectively as the Nephilim. Then they were killed in the flood, and where did the spirits go? Well, you can't drown a spirit, so it's my position that these spirit beings that are running around the earth masquerading as ghosts and goblins are really just the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim that were killed by God in the flood of Noah and are called in the New Testament demons. And so a lot of the stuff, in fact all of the stuff that we see in Hollywood depictions of horror stories or monsters and the like, all those things have a basis in truth, and the basis in truth is clearly supported when we look at scriptures. Well, if you look in scriptures, is there a devil? In Halloween there's a devil, in scary movies there's a devil, in the Bible there's a devil. He's a real person, he has thoughts, he has feelings, and he's malevolent. In movies and in scary books and things of that nature, demons exist in the Bible. We learned that demons actually do exist, and that they think, they have feelings, they have a malicious nature, mischief nature. They hate people and they hurt people. Just like in the B movies when we were a kid growing up, we saw Dracula and all these things. We saw the Mummy and zombies in the Bible. Anything about zombies in the Bible? Absolutely. We'll get to that. This will be probably at least a 2-week series, so we'll get to that when we get to the verses relating to certain creatures in the Bible that are common or comparable to what we see in the scary movies as zombies. Do we see Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stones? Well, that's a children's book. You know, Harry Potter was a series of books to teach kids how to read. No, it was really, the purpose behind it was to teach kids how to be initiated into the occult. Sorcery is real. How do I know that? Because it says so in the Bible. And we see in the Bible that there are instances where God condemns sorcery and sorcerers and sorceresses. So we know that witches, referred to in B movies, it's a Rage Ghastly, Halloween, you're gonna have some channels, at least in the Midwest where I grew up, you'd have the Halloween Fright Night, and you get all the scary movies. They start about 8 p.m. after the local news went off, and they run all night. And when you got back from trick-or-treating, you sit down, and you can stay up to 2 in the morning watching scary movies that usually will come on Saturday nights, but now you get to do it, and because you have the imprimatur of the entire country, because it was Halloween, man. And so in some ways it was better than Christmas, because it wasn't even snowing on the ground yet. You could still have fun running around the neighborhood and all that in the Midwest, and it might be a little nippy out, but it wasn't snowing or cold. So so the question is then, is it okay to celebrate Halloween? For me, a Midwesterner growing up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and at the time that I grew up, we were taught Halloween in elementary school by our elementary school teachers, how to do arts and crafts and make little witches and goblins and pumpkins. Pumpkin carving, one of the funnest things I ever did. Building models, reading comic books, and carving pumpkins. One of the best things I ever did in my entire life. My dad was excellent at carving pumpkins. I could never do as well, but I was certainly inspired by his artistic largesse in emptying out a pumpkin and putting the face on it and put the candle in that sucker. And you try to beat last year's record. How many days you can make it last? You got the red pumpkin, we had the candle in, and after a while it starts to rot. By the time you didn't want to get rid of it because you loved your little pumpkin. So by the time you got to the end of the first week of November, that pumpkin's he's kind of leaning over there, man. He's looking spry and malevolent and mischief like on Halloween night. But by the time you got to like I said, midway to Thanksgiving, kind of turned into pumpkin mush. So, these things are all part and parcel of some of our upbringings, and people will say, well, why do you want to be an iconoclast? Why do you want to destroy, the American culture and things of that nature? And, the reality is, Scripture says, and that's the verse I think that I closed the very first Halloween teaching back in 2012 down when we were doing it outdoors. And Steve said, man, I got to go to work, but that's the verse that stood out in your mind. It says, where the Bible says that we are to have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. Yeah. And so what we're doing here tonight isn't casting a blow or aspersions against, Middle American traditions that are beloved and whatever. What we're doing is exposing how Satan is brilliant as a military tactician and interweaving into our lives as Americans, Americana, and in the world in general, satanic ceremonies that are geared to provide glory and power to him and the fallen angels that sided with him long ago and far away. When the long war against God originally began, Satan and 1/3 of the angels took up one side, and the other 2/3 of angels defended the name of God, and Satan and the angels were cast out, and they came down into the atmosphere of our world, the planet Earth, that was created by God for mankind. And we were supposed to dominate and control it and do all these wonderful things. But we see that in the Garden of Eden, things went awry, and Satan exercised his brilliant plan, and it ties in to Halloween because we find out that goddess worship, which we looked at, in some detail over the last 5 weeks when we were talking about the Antichrist, we got a fast forward, we looked ahead to Revelation chapter 17 and Revelation chapter 18 that lays out the final days of Mystery Babylon, the mother of harlots. What is that? It's a city with a false form of Christianity set up in it, but it's also a worship-based system that's based upon exaltation of the woman into a position of godhood, the goddess, the worship of the goddess. Where did that begin? That is part and parcel of what Halloween is all about. That's part and parcel of why witchcraft is such a big deal for women. Wicca, which is the modern day, equivalent of ancient Middle Ages witchcraft, is really or was really the first opportunity women had to, to make their empowerment movement. In the Christian church, men were kind of considered to be the head of the show. The Bible actually goes out and says, as Christ is the head of, the church, so man is the head of the woman, and, in terms of the nuclear family, the kids, the wife, husband, and then God above that. And that's the superstructure that the church operated from. So a number of women in the Middle Ages found the opportunity to get empowered, because in the Middle Ages, women were looked at as sort of an accessory piece to the man, or the camp who would help raise the children, but men really kind of controlled society. So it was very easy for Satan to come along with what appeared to be this brand new paradigm in the Middle Ages. And the women of Britannia, which is now present day England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and approach them with a whole new program where, hey, you don't want to be sitting in those long, boring church services. Come out in the woods, and I'm going to introduce you to this new group. It was a cult of Wicca worship, worshiping the trees, worshiping the nature gods. And it was exciting for the women to find out that, hey, the God of the earth is really a girl, just like you. She's a goddess, and you're a goddess too, you just don't know it. And so it was easier for Satan to recruit women out of the church into ancient pagan, basically it's a form of feminist Satanism, which became popularized as witchcraft during and prior to the Middle Ages. But witchcraft and that form of practice, which now is encompassed in what we call Halloween today, didn't even start in the Middle Ages. A lot of people say, well, it dates all the way back to the Celtic Druids of the 16th century, or 13th century, or 11th century. It goes back even further than that. So to help us with that, I did a little chart, and the chart would support my position that the roots of Halloween, which are satanic in nature, actually began in the Garden of Eden way back some, 6,000 years now ago. These things happened, about 4,000 BC. Satan approaches Eve in the Garden of Eden and approaches her with the opportunity to become the first witch, the first wicked, the first wise one. That's what the term wicked means, the wise one. And that she happens to be a woman became the leitmotif of the satanic intrigue against the God of heaven, who was depicted in the Bible as a strong father figure and is manifest in human flesh, not in the form of his only begotten daughter, but in the form of his only begotten son. All of the holy angels in the Bible are depicted in the masculine form. The woman was a unique invention of God. Why? Because Adam was alone in the Garden of Eden, alone on the planet Earth. Even though all the animals loved him, and he named them all, and he could play with them all, and nobody killed each other, and spiders didn't bite, people, and spiders didn't eat flies. Everybody loved everybody else in the planet Earth, even before Adam was placed in the Garden of Eden. But the Bible says that God looked at Adam and says, it is not good for the man to be alone. Therefore, I will make him an help meet for him, meaning appropriate for him. And so he put Adam to sleep, performed surgery on him, took out a rib, and from that rib, meaning had Adam's DNA, which God had given to him, and fashioned him in the image of God, and fashioned from Adam's rib, from Adam's DNA, a person who was like him in comparison to the animals of the rest of the planet Earth, but was different from him too. It was a woman. And the Bible says, when God woke Adam up from surgery, he looked over and he said, hey now, this is okay. And he says, hey now, this is flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Not like the kangaroo that comes and hangs out with me in the cool of the day. This is even better than Carrie the kangaroo. This is a woman, and they called her woman because she was taken from out of the man. And so what does Satan do? He realizes that God has chosen his governor or his spokesperson for authority on the planet Earth, and that person was Adam, the original man. So what does Satan do? He knows he can't turn Adam, because Adam, he saw God do all the stuff, and he named all the animals, and he knows that God is responsible for all of these things, so he gives glory to God. It'd be very hard to turn Adam. So what does Satan do? He goes to the woman. And the Bible suggests that the woman was naive, meaning she was innocent and gullible, and she believed that the serpent was telling her the truth. When he approached her and said, "Have you eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil?" And Eve said, "Oh no, God said, in the day that we eat of it, we shall surely die." And so then Satan says to her, "What translation of the Bible was it that you read that in? Because if you got the wrong translation, you might get the wrong meaning." That's in essence what he said, right?
Sure.
What he literally said was, "Did God indeed say that? Are you sure?" That's the same thing they're doing now. It's like, "Well, what translation? Oh, you're using that King James? Nobody can understand that." In the modern translations, homosexuality is okay. Gay marriage is good. You just have the old-fashioned King Jamesian version that uses archaic Victorian English. That's why you think that adultery is a sin, or murder is wrong, or we're not little gods. And so Satan was able to convince Eve by saying, "Oh, God knows. God's a liar." First, he caused her to question God and his wisdom and his kindness and his intellect. And then he called God an outright liar. He says, "God knows you will not surely die." He lied to you when he told you that. God knows that in the day that you eat thereof, of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will become like God, knowing good and evil, and you yourself will be a God. And so Eve looked at the tree and the fruit, and seeing that it was a tree good for food and desirable to make one wise, the Bible says, she did eat. And that's where we get the term occult from. Occult means hidden. The knowledge of good and evil, God wanted to hide from Adam and Eve because they were innocent like children. You don't want to know about evil, just about good. They knew about good, they didn't know about evil. And so Satan, to a certain extent, told the truth. And the best lie is the one that mixes truth with a lie. He was telling the truth when he said, "You will be like God, and that you will know good and evil," because God knows what evil is, and he knows what good is. He knows the difference, because he's God, he knows everything. But you aren't going to be like God in that you'll be all powerful and you can create things and speak things into existence. No, you're going to die, just like he said. But when he said, "In the day that you eat thereof, you shall surely die," he didn't mean the 24-hour day, Yom, that's used in the Bible. What he meant was the sort of millennial day that's referenced throughout Scripture, a 1,000-year period of time. And so we find out that no human being, even the oldest living man on earth, Methuselah,
832.
close, but not quite,
Not quite.
969. He missed it by 31 years. He got to within 31 years of living to 1,000 years, which would have proven God a liar. But even Methuselah couldn't make it to 1,000 years.
But we will.
Well, we will at one point, but
At one point.
yeah, down the road a piece. So in fact, in the day that they ate thereof, within the 1,000-year period of time, they both died, Adam and Eve. Adam lived over 900 years, as did Eve, and they died before they got to 1,000. But metaphysically, spiritually, they died that instant. The minute that Eve ate the fruit, she was no longer sin-free. She was no longer pure, meaning the soul, the spirit that was put inside of her physical body. Physical body isn't who you are. Who you are is what lives inside your physical body. Who you are is what will be extracted from your physical body when you die or when the rapture occurs. The real you that's really you just lives in your body the same way a person lives in an apartment, or the same way a person gets in a car and drives from one point to another point. So what happens now is that in the day that Adam and Eve eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, spiritually they're dead instantaneously. It just takes almost 1,000 years for the physical body to decay, because God made it in such a brilliant way that it took about 1,000 years for it to decay to the point where it no longer functioned as, think of it like a machine, like a car. I've got a car, it's got a lot of miles on it, but I take good care of it, so it runs really well. Other people that don't take care of the car as well, the car dies out earlier. Because they had all brand new, genuine GM parts put in, GM meaning God made parts. How about that? It's quick on your feet. Quick on your feet, man. Become trial turns for nothing. But and that's why it took so long for the bodies to decay. Now we are several generations down the road. With each generation, Ben's done some teaching on the theory of evolution, and Ben could tell us Darwin was wrong about evolution, right? We're not getting better and better with each generation of human beings. We're getting worse and worse. Geneticists will tell you that there's more defects in the human genome now than there were 1,000 years ago. And if we were to exist for another 1,000 years, there would be more defects then. Eventually, the human genome, which means all the nucleotidal base pairs that combine together to form genes to tell the proteins and amino acids how to build a body, how to build eyeballs, how to build heart. Yeah, and so with each generation, eventually, the blueprint would become so filled with errors that it wouldn't be able to create a functional machine anymore. So it's like using a photocopier. If I gave you the instructions to build a Model T motor vehicle, and you photocopied it again and again and again, over time, the ink runs out on the ink printer, or the copier begins to wear out, and you start losing a little bit of its definition. Like we're broadcasting tonight in high def, HD. Back in the day, you were in low def. I remember the big switch over came in 2009, and it was like night and day. I remember when the government mandated we all had to go to HD, and I had to get an HD flat screen. And I remember one of the first things I ever saw, they were covering the funeral of Michael Jackson. Wow. They were at Neverland. And Larry King live was broadcasting live from Neverland. And he was interviewing, I think it was Jermaine Jackson. And they were sitting in the garden in Neverland. And that was like the first thing I'd ever seen in HD. And I looked at it, and this was just in 2009. And I was like, holy crap, I can see like the ladybug crawling on the plant back, 2 rows behind where the cameraman is, way behind where the people being interviewed, because everything was in such startlingly clear definition. And people say after you watched an HD movie, you can't go back to watch them regularly, because you go back, you're like, what? How did I even watch this? And I looked at stuff I grew up watching in regular definition television, and the contrast and the difference is so great. So anyway, the point being that we have, over the course of generations, lost information, not gained. We're not becoming HD, genetically speaking. We're going lower definition. With each generation, we're losing more and more coded information, because in the copying process, something's not. One letter is getting lost. You make 100 copies of something. The outline that I created for the Halloween teaching, which I passed out, if I photocopy this page 300 times, by the 300th copy, it's not going to be as clear. I'm going to lose some of the information. And that's what's happening with the human genome. With each generation, we're losing genetic information, which is encoded in what we call our DNA, in the form of what? Numbers, letters?
Algorithms?
In letters, come on, DNA. The DNA sequencing base pairs are broken down.
Or Y and A chromosomes, Y and X chromosomes?
Well, X and Y chromosomes certainly are containers of larger groups of genetic information. But when you take the DNA and unravel it, and you look at it under a scanning electron microscope, you see what?
Genes.
You see, genes are, the DNA groups together in clumps that forms the gene. And the genes group together to tell the body to do different things. But if you pull the genes apart and just take a strand of DNA itself and unravel it, I've been told it can stretch from here to the moon and back 300 times. Just, the DNA, strung together like thread on a spool inside, the human body. It's so long, when you unravel it, it can stretch to the moon to the earth 100 times, back and forth. No, but what it contains is information in the form of letters. They're really chemicals: adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine. And those 4 letters, A, T, C, G, together spell out words. And the words spell out the different parts of the body, the different subparts of the body. And so all human life in a physical form is broken down into those 4 letters. But the problem is, with each replication of the genome, when the DNA of the mommy comes together with the DNA of the daddy, during the transcription phase, the DNA is split apart, and then RNA comes in and attaches itself to the DNA and tells the DNA to do certain things, and then it replicates, and during the phase of genetic reproduction called mitosis as opposed to meiosis, then it builds itself back. The RNA comes over and plugs in the different missing letters to create a brand new strand. So you get the strand torn apart, and then you add the mother's DNA. RNA puts the stuff in there, and you create a brand new DNA strand that has both sides filled in. But with each stripping apart and replugging in the letters, you're going to lose a letter now and again. And that's why we have genetic disease like muscular dystrophy and multiple sclerosis and things of that nature. So with each successive generation, the human race is getting less and less functional. We're getting less and less like God originally intended us to be. Less and less like God originally created us to be. We're becoming less godlike and more devolved. Evolution is a farce. So Satan in the Garden of Eden lied to Eve and told her that she would become a goddess by taking in information. She didn't. So that's where it all started out. And then we go on a little bit, and I'll just pull down my other chart. Let's take a look here. So here we have in the Garden of Eden the fall. And the fall of man occurs in that Garden of Eden after Satan gets Eve to eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and then Eve gets her husband to do it, and because he was the corporate head of the human family, the whole human race falls, and all of creation, the whole universe, falls into corruption and decay. The second law of thermodynamics kicks in, which is the law of what? Anybody knows?
Entropy.
Entropy, cosmic entropy. Entropy on a cosmic scale. Everything in the entire universe is winding down like a sprung wound clock, meaning it's getting tick, 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 tick. And eventually, scientists tell us the entire universe is going to experience what's called heat death, because there's heat in every one of the molecules in the universe, and it's giving off heat the same way the sun gives off heat to heat the earth and makes crops grow and whatever, so on and so forth. Give you sunburn when you go to the beach. But as each one of those molecules gives off the heat, it eventually is going to run out of heat. And everything in the universe is going to go cold. And when that happens, there will be universal death from one end of the created universe, the cosmos, to the other. And scientists all opine that that's coming. Now some people say it'll be 100 million years before that happens, others say it'll be 10 million years before that happens. But everybody agrees that it's happening right now. The universe is dying. The universe isn't getting bigger and better and more complex. It's getting slower and colder and less usable, and eventually it will no longer be habitable by human life. And that's a good thing, and that's okay, because what we find out is that the Bible promises us that there is coming a day when there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth wherein dwelleth righteousness. The universe that we live in now wasn't meant to last forever. It was meant to be a set piece, a stage upon which a cosmic drama would play out. And we would be both the stars and the prize of that cosmic drama. And Dr. Henry Morris calls it the long war against God, which Satan waged against God at the beginning of time. From eternity past, God created space-time and put physical things into space-time. And shortly after that, Satan decided he wanted to be God, but because the job was already filled, there was a fight. And the fight was between God, angels, and Satan.
And Satan's the protagonist.
Well, I think that would be one way to look at it. If you were a literary critic, you would probably use that term. So we find out then that the fall starts this whole process in motion, wherein Satan is now trying to compete with God for the attention of man and for the control of man. Satan has decided to use the woman to create a new paradigm, a new religious prototype, wherein women would be the top of the human family. And that's what you find in witchcraft, Wicca. You find that the woman is exalted to the position of goddess, and because she can give birth to a child, she's worshipped as a fertility goddess. And that's where in about 2400 BC, sometime after the flood. We already talked about the Nephilim and how demons probably are the disembodied spirit of the offspring of the fallen angels that came down and had sex with human women. And those Nephilim eventually were killed, and their spirits wandered the earth and became the demons of the New Testament. Shortly after that, God destroys the world with the flood of Noah. Now civil government begins to form. You got Noah and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. And from those 4 people, or those 4 men, all humans on the earth derive. So today we had up at the University of Florida, my intern was up there, so she sent me a little link for the speech for this Richard Spencer, you know, white supremacist, George Soros financed agent provocateur, who was attempting not to gain, you know, special civil rights for white people, but really to create a race war within the United States of America for the purpose of destroying the last democratic republic based upon Christian principles on earth. And once the United States of America falls, the rest of the world will go into the New World Order like a duck goes into water. It'll be very easy.
You mean domino effect.
And there you go. And so what we see we saw that happening today. And so what we see then is that shortly after the flood, we see that all the people that came about from Noah and his 3 sons, which means that Richard Spencer is wrong. White people aren't a different race of people than everybody else on earth. White people, black people, Asian people are all the same race, the human race. Why? Because they all have genetically descended from the original man, Adam. We're all Adamic, which makes us all human. We're all cousins of one another, but we come from different tribes, different ethnic groups, different groupings of people, so we have different looks. If you ever go to a family reunion, take a look at your family reunion next time you go, and see how many people don't look anything like you. You're like, that's not looking guy. They maybe have the same general skin tone as you, but the eyes will be different, the ears will be different, the way people talk. You'd be very surprised at how odd some of the people at your own family reunions look to you, and you look to them probably as well. So that happens within immediate family. So when you start scattering people all over the earth, which is what God planned to do with the flood, but along came a king by the name of Nimrod, and he built a number of cities, Babylon being one, Akkad being another, and he decided that he was going to be the first world emperor. And did he come up with that plan all on his own?
His wife.
I would submit to you that it wasn't even his wife. It was Satan who, through his wife, certainly would provide. Osiris would be the Egyptian form, but in the Babylonian form, her name was what? It's the Babylonian form of Osiris.
What's the first letter?
Osiris, I'm sorry, would be the husband, and Isis would be the Egyptian form of the wife. The Babylonian form would be what?
What's the first letter?
S.
Semiramis.
Semiramis, right. Semiramis marries Nimrod. Nimrod becomes the first world emperor, and Nimrod decides to build a gigantic tower, which in essence is a stargate, a dimensional portal by which the fallen angels who have been condemned and thrown down from the 3rd heaven, where God's throne is, to the 2nd and 1st heavens. The 2nd heavens where sun, moon, stars are. 1st heaven where the clouds, birds, and airplanes are. But there were no airplanes in those days, so they just had clouds and birds. So anyway, so those fallen angels needed a place like an airport. They needed a runway. They needed a landing spot. Just like, you know, the Hindenburg Zeppelins back in the day.
Star Trek.
See, the Hindenburg was destroyed in Lakehurst, New Jersey.
So, yeah.
It exploded as it was trying to attach itself to a mooring post. So the Zeppelin would come in, and it would drop a line, and on the ground would be like a giant block and tackle, and the Zeppelin would drop the line, and somebody on the line would attach it to the mooring post, and that would prevent the balloon from floating away. And then it could lower itself, and eventually let stairs out, and people come out of the compartment. So the Tower of Babel was really a gigantic mooring post for the fallen angels who float through the air like a zeppelin, like a dirigible, like the Hindenburg. And they needed a place to moor, to land, to attach themselves so they can disembark and interact with human beings. God didn't want them interacting with human beings because they were deceptive and powerful and far wiser in terms of knowledge than the man. And so what God did is he cut off the activity of the third eye, the pineal gland in the front of the brain, sort of like your direct TV satellite dish when your kids, cable TV, like the mom would program so you couldn't get the adult channels and look at the nudie stuff that was even back in the early days of cable TV on certain channels, from what I hear, and and you couldn't access those. And God did the same thing. He disconnected the adult channel on your cable system so that you couldn't interact with the fallen angels. And that's why the third eye is shut down. And that's why in the occult, you always see or hear this obsession with opening your third eye and using drugs like LSD or ayahuasca to reopen or reactivate the pineal gland, which sits at the very front of the brain. And God intentionally deactivated it so you couldn't see into the spirit world and interact with the angels the way Adam and Eve could do prior to the fall. They interacted with God face to face and were able to interact with Satan in the form of a serpent face to face. And they could see the spirit beings of the air. And because now man had made himself a target for deception because he listened to the voice of his wife, God, for a safety measure, threw them out of the Garden of Eden, lest they take of the tree of life and live forever in a fallen state, and set up an angel to guard the way of the tree of life, which now disappears in Genesis chapter 3 and doesn't appear again until we get to Revelation chapter 21 and 22. So we find out in the interim, the Tower of Babel is built. The first world emperor, Nimrod, is trying to unite the world together because now Nimrod has found out that by certain occultic sexual rituals, he can change his own DNA. He can reconfigure the alphabets that make up the A, T, C, G. He can rearrange them in such a way as to make himself the world's first Superman. And so Nimrod was able to change himself, the Bible says, into a Gibborim, a Superman, a mighty one, the same title that's given to the offspring of fallen angels and human women, the Nephilim. He changed himself into a God-man on earth. And in so doing, was fully possessed by the devil. He and his wife Semiramis created this mystery Babylon system. Really begins way back here. So Halloween is really the high, holy, occultic ritual day of ancient Babylonian paganism, which was dating back to what, 2400 BC, right? So Halloween didn't really start in the Middle Ages or in the 900s AD. It didn't start in 1100 AD in Britannia or Gaul or modern day Scotland and Ireland. It became very popular there. It obtained a revival of sorts there during the Middle Ages and Dark Ages, and at the very end of the Roman Empire. But it really has its start back in ancient Babylon, when the Mystery Babylon religion was created by Satan, and the poster girl for the new goddess worship system would be the wife of Nimrod, Semiramis. And when Nimrod is killed, and some people think that it was Noah's son Shem who killed Nimrod, because Nimrod, as part of this new Mystery Babylon religion that he created, instituted as a holy sacrament the following: the raping of children and the blood sacrifice of children. So raping kids and killing them was part and parcel of the Mystery Babylon sex rituals. Bloodshed always required. There is a metaphysical reason for that. And the Bible doesn't give us the specific details on it, but if you look at Satanism long enough, you see that everyone that gets involved in higher levels of Satanism or the higher levels of witchcraft eventually have to get involved in human blood sacrifice, because that's how the demons and the fallen angels empower themselves. Is it necessary for them to be able to allow them to take on physical form? Some people have suggested that's the way they get the metaphysical power, to be able to take on particulate physical bodies that they wouldn't normally have full time. Now we see in the Bible, angels can take on physical forms for limited periods of time and wreak havoc. You know, one angel appeared and killed 144,000 Syrian trained soldiers at the direction of the Lord. One angel. Now imagine what these fallen angels, maybe billions of them, could do if they could reside full time in physical forms. We're going to see something like that during the last half of the tribulation period. We talked about that last week. Antichrist is going to have his army of Nephilim that are going to come up out of the Abuso, and the fallen angels that were imprisoned in Tartarus for the crime of what? Raping and marrying human women and creating or siring a whole new race of superhuman beings. Now that's an
Transhumanism, you would say.
There you go. That would be an interracial relationship. When a white guy from, Norway marries a black woman from Nigeria, that's not an interracial relationship, because they're both the same race, the human race, because they're both descendants of Adam. That may be an interethnic, because the people that lived in Africa interbred with just their own little group for so long, and the people that lived in Norway or Scandinavia interbred with their own group for so long, that the cousins and second cousins and third cousins all became similar to one another, so they started looking like one another. Whereas in another part of the world, other groups started interbreeding with one another, because God said, they built the Tower of Babel. Now, nothing will be withheld from them that they choose. The New World Order can be established today. Therefore, God said to Jesus, let's go down and confound their language so they can't understand each other, and by doing so, destroy the Tower of Babel. And then change the languages, confounded the languages of all the people who spoke one language at that time, so that certain groups couldn't understand another group. So what happened is God forced the sons of Adam, the children of men, to segregate out into smaller people groups. But they were all people. Everybody in Babylon whose language was combined, they were human beings. But God changed their languages so they couldn't understand. So they couldn't get married to one another. They couldn't go on a date. Hey, you want to go on a date? What? I said, did you want to go on a date? I don't understand you. Oh, okay, so it's like that then, right? You don't have to pretend like you don't understand me.
Yeah.
I get the message. And so that guy walked off insulted, and then when he met a girl that could understand what he's saying, he said, you want to go on a date? And she said, oh yeah, you got a car? And there you go. And so God was able to supernaturally change the speech patterns of human beings so that he could enforce his will for the children of men. Now you got people groups dividing out based upon not what color their skin was, but on whether or not they could understand each other's speech patterns. And so they started spreading out away from the people they couldn't understand, because they couldn't communicate with them anymore. They're going to have, dissonance, unrest, and probably a little bit of warfare. And you're like, that's my plot of land, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what? I said, that's my plot of land. What's he saying? Don't pretend like you don't understand me, and you didn't fight it out. And whoever fights the best gets the plot of land. And the other guy has to run off. Goes, that guy beat me up, Steve beat me. I don't know why. I was trying to talk sense to him, but it's like he couldn't understand a word I was saying, man. That guy's unreasonable. Let's move over here and take this pastor. And they kept doing that and spreading out. And eventually, the children of men spread around the whole globe, just like God intended. And the people that spoke the same language went out on dates, got married to each other, and had babies together. And so, when you start interbreeding with your own little grouping, your own little neighborhood, think about it wherever you grew up. If you only could marry a girl that lived within your elementary school district, like remember in elementary school, it was big to me when I was a kid, but then I got to junior high school and my world got so much bigger. Because there were kids from other elementary schools that were now part of my everyday school setting. And then, a few years later, 2 years later, I went to high school for the first year in 9th grade, and my world got enormous because there were kids from all over town, from different junior high schools, that fed in from different elementary schools that I'd never even heard of, and we were all together in the same school. And that's kind of the way it is with the way God socialized us. So you could only marry people in your elementary school district, which was like 12 blocks wide or whatever, depending on what city you lived in. So if somebody on the other side of town is only marrying people within that 12-block area, after several generations of having babies, people are going to start taking on characteristics that are similar to one another. They're going to talk the same, they're going to start looking the same, and eventually they're going to become distinctive. And that's what happened. Native American Indians look different than West Africans. Why? Because they all interbreeded together, and most Native American Indians in a certain part of, say Michigan, are going to look more alike than somebody in West India or somebody in East India, in Calcutta. They both have dark reddish brown skin, but they're going to have different facial features, they're going to have different language, they're going to have different customs and different traditions. And that's what God did with the whole human race. But they were all human beings because they were all sons of Adam and daughters of Eve, just genetically moved down generation after generation after generation. So, like I said before, everybody on the planet Earth is everybody else's cousin, except for the Nephilim, who are a different race of people because they're not fully human. Their fathers are the fallen angels. Our father is Adam. And so, there you have at the Tower of Babel, God confounding the languages, but you also have the creation of the Mystery Babylon system. And after God confounded the languages to keep the people under control, Nimrod and his wife Semiramis, and again I said, Shem was one of the sons of Noah, it suggested that he went forth and killed Nimrod. And as a result, Semiramis, who was supposed to be in mourning for her dead husband, apparently was fooling around with the pool boy after hours and got pregnant. But she couldn't let the people of Babylon, who loved their king Nimrod and worshipped him as a god, she couldn't be unfaithful to him sexually because then she'd look like a harlot. So, depending on what tradition you listen to, it's suggested that she came up with, I'm sure Satan suggested it to her in the form of a dream or in the form of a vision, that she come up with a story that while she is pregnant, she got pregnant by her dead husband Nimrod. And they said, well, how could that be? He's been dead and buried for 6 months now. Well, he was resurrected in the form of the sun. And so sun god worship began and was created in ancient Babylon, where you worship the sun as a living being in the form of a giant globe burning out in space. The sun is a giant ball of hydrogen gas that God put out in space to show how cool he was and to keep the earth warm and for us to be able to mark times and seasons and see that time is running out and Jesus is about to come back and the kingdom of God is coming. Satan took that big ball of gas made by God and turned it into a false god, an idol. And so the people of Babylon were convinced by Semiramis, his widow, that that big ball of hydrogen gas out in space is my husband who came back to life. And one day, he shot a beam of sunlight right into my cervix. And that's what the whole layout of Washington, D.C. is. I don't have time to go into great detail there, but the whole Capitol Rotunda is the impregnated belly of Semiramis. And the Washington Monument, which is a gigantic phallic symbol, which in times past had not only polished marble, but gold on top of the pyramid on top of the phallic symbol, so that on certain occultic holidays, the sun would hit the tip of the Washington Monument, which was plated in gold, and it would refract a beam of sunlight down the mall through a portico or a window in the Capitol Rotunda, and it would illuminate the ceiling, which inside the Capitol Rotunda, if you ever go in and take a look up, you'll see not Jesus Christ or God the Father or the Ten Commandments. You're going to see a fresco, a painting that goes around the interior of the Capitol Rotunda Dome of all of the ancient gods of Greek and Roman antiquity. Jupiter, Zeus, all of the other gods, Atlas, Hermes, all of the pagan gods of antiquity are depicted in the Capitol Rotunda, which is strange because America is supposed to be a Christian country, not a pagan country.
How about Dagon?
No Dagon there, but he's not a Greek god. So, but the Greek gods, and the apotheosis of George Washington is the centerpiece. In other words, George Washington, who was the first president of the United States of America, is depicted on a throne in the form of Zeus. An ancient sculpture of Zeus from Greece was sort of transmogrified, and the artist depicted George Washington sitting in his Grecian robe in the form of Jupiter doing the as above, so below satanic hand sign as he's sitting on the throne. And the painting is called the apotheosis of George Washington, which means, a fancy way of saying, George Washington is transforming from a man into a god, which is the entire basis of the New World Order, which has entangled our country and our capital and our leadership, and began where? It's the lie told by the serpent in the garden. You can become a god. And that's the basis of the New World Order. And that's why Washington Monument is set up at a certain angle, and that's why the Capitol Rotunda is down in it, and that's why there's domes. The dome is really the impregnated belly of Semiramis. And the Washington Monument is a giant phallic symbol. It's like a gigantic penis that on a certain occultic holiday will shoot a beam of light down the mall through a window into the Capitol Rotunda, which really is a way of, in a structural sort of motif, playing out the story of Mystery Babylon, the story of Semiramis becoming impregnated by her god-man husband, who now became the sun god. So the sun god can impregnate Semiramis, not through intercourse, but by a supernatural act, so that a virgin will conceive and give birth to a new world order. And that child was none other than Tammuz. And Tammuz became, the dying and resurrected sun god king's reincarnated form. And it was a way of parodying the coming Trinity of God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. God the Son, born of a virgin, that was played out and parodied centuries in advance by Semiramis and Nimrod and their son Tammuz. And so we see that the Mystery Babylon system really starts in 2400 BC, starts in ancient Babylon, and as a sacrament, human beings have to die. And it became part of the agrarian culture's harvest cycle. And long before there was, General Motors and Ford Motor Corporation in Detroit, Michigan, or Mercedes-Benz in Germany, or Ferrari in Maranello, Italy, these great automobile manufacturing centers that, champion and are the industries that provide the economic basis for so many of the nations of today. Back in the day, agriculture was the way to go. Why? Because in the Garden of Eden, Adam's first job was to basically be the husbandman. He was supposed to take care of the garden. Stuff grew in the garden, and he was supposed to prune it and take care of it, and there was food abundance. But when they got kicked out of the garden, food became hard to come by, and man had to toil. Adam and eventually his sons had to toil very hard with the ground to provide enough food for their families to eat. And so growing food became one part of the curse, because the idle mind is the devil's playground, it says. And so what God did is he decided to keep Adam and his children busy, because if they weren't busy, then Satan would come along and fill their mind with all kinds of occultic nonsense, and wickedness and mischievous would come. So man had to work to provide for enough food for himself and his family to survive. And so, God says in Genesis chapter 3, from the sweat of thy brow shalt thou eat bread all the days of your life until you return to the ground, because from out of it wast thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return. You're going to have to work all the days of your life, man, until you die, because you listen to the voice of your wife and rebelled against God. And that's why we got to go to work. And if we don't work, we don't have enough money to eat, and we don't have money to eat, we starve, and we're very unhappy people. And so that's part of the curse of sin from the Garden of Eden. And so we find out that Nimrod had instituted a policy whereby human children would be killed and sacrificed. And that sort of worked its way through from 2400 BC, from about the time of the Tower of Babel, all the way through ancient Israel. When ancient Israel came along, wow, guess what happened? Well, they adopted some of the practices of the pagans. Now, The next major phase, I would say, of the Mystery Babylon religion came, say between 2000 and 2300 BC. The Celts, the Celtic people, are the forerunners of people that eventually migrated into Europe and became, the residents of Gaul or Britannia or Ireland and Scotland. Those people were preceded by an Indo-European group of people known as the Celts. And the Celts had a Babylonian pagan system of religious worship that they had adopted from Nimrod. And that system, when Semiramis eventually died out in 2400 BC, she had already inculcated into the people the idea that she was a fertility goddess because she could give birth without having sex. She could get pregnant by a sunbeam because her husband was the sun. And her child was the reincarnated form of her husband, who was literally the sun in the sky. Now her son on earth was a god-man who was the reincarnated form of her deceased sun god husband, who was also the king. That Mystery Babylon system was adopted by an Indo-European group of people that eventually became the Scots Gaelic people of the Irish Isles or the English Isles, the Ireland, Scotland, Wales. Those people, the Indo-Europeans known as the Celts, eventually migrated to what we would call, back then was called Brittany or Britannia, which we would now call the United Kingdom. And those individuals had over them a group of priests who were the ministers and the conductors of the Mystery Babylon religious system that was created by Nimrod and Semiramis in 2400 BC in ancient Babylon. So now, we're about 2000 BC, now you've got this group of priests who call themselves Druids. And the Druids were what? The Druids were the term Druid is really, literally oakmen. The oakmen or the men of oak were called that because they had added a new twist to the Mystery Babylon system, which included pedophilia, murdering children, spilling blood to appease the god of the heavens. So the Druids said, well, the god of heaven, Nimrod, now took on the name of Samhain, or SAH-WEEN was another name that they called him in the ancient Celtic tongue. And SAH-WEEN, the Lord of the Dead, was also the king of the harvest. And so, tying back in, the story of Nimrod becoming the sun to heat up the earth, that's a lie, right? And these lies tend to take on different transmutations and permutations over time. And so the Nimrod became the sun story, turned sort of into Samhain or SAH-WEEN being the Lord of Death. In other words, he can decide who lives and who dies. How does he do it? With the use of the sun. He'll make the sun to shine in your crops in the summertime. And at the end of the summer harvest, you'll get enough sunlight for all the crops to grow, the wheat, the grain, the corn, and all of that. And you take in all of those things and you put them into the storehouse. And then when the fall comes, what happens? The sun begins to wax and wane. And then it goes away for 6 months. In Michigan, you have 4 seasons. And so at about October, by the time you get to what we now call Halloween, it starts to get, we had 1 or 2 Halloweens. I remember where it snowed. And we had others where it was in the 70s, but we had 1 or 2 where cold got here a little quicker than we anticipated. And what happens is you can't grow crops. In Michigan, they grew cherries, they grew apples, grew corn, all kinds of, it's an agrarian state, dairy industry. You couldn't do any of those things in the snow. So you would do all that stuff in the summertime and in the springtime. But at the end of the summer, that's the time of the harvest. At the end of the harvest, winter would come. And so Samhain or SAH-WEEN became the Lord of the harvest. And he could decide who lived and who died by deciding whose crops grow and whose crops don't grow. So after your crops grew that summer, you live in a certain town or village, you had to show your obeisance, thankfulness to SAH-WEEN.
So what?
SAH-WEEN. the Lord of the harvest. And you had to do that by what? By providing a ritual sacrifice to him. And that's where this whole Druidic practice of the ancient Wicker Man ceremony began. The Wicker Man is now, is reenacted in the summertime.
In the Midwest, big wooden thing burning for days. Big
Well,
fire there.
yeah, except they don't do it in the Midwest anymore, but now in New Mexico.
New Mexico. The Wicker Man, yes.
Yeah, I got it though. I got it. I know you co-pilot me, but if I get stuck, I'll definitely turn to you. But let me do it, because if we teach in stereo, nobody's going to be able to understand on the internet. So, okay, so the Wicker Man ceremony, which we saw a modern day iteration of this summer called the Burning Man. Burning Man and Wicker Man is the same thing. Burning Man ceremony this summer, supposedly some guy broke through security and ran into the gigantic burning effigy of a man made of wicker and burned himself to death. I have suggested, and I would submit to you, that was not some loon who broke free in security, like was looking the other way, whatever. It was all pre-planned. And what we see is that Satan is demanding ritual human sacrifices, just like he did back, 2,500 years ago, 4,000 years ago, 2,400 BC. Human blood sacrifices were popularized and started by Nimrod. In 2000 BC, the Druid priests took over and created Druidism, which was the worship of supposedly nature gods and spirits that lived in oak trees, which is why they were called Druids, the men of oak, because the spirits that lived in the trees could make the crops grow, because they were, under the control of SAH-WEEN, which was the god of the heavens and the Lord of the harvest. And so, this Burning Man situation where a guy ran into a gigantic wicker effigy, which was supposedly some kind of symbolic thing, it is exactly the same structure that was used as far back as 2300 BC. That means that would be 23 centuries before Jesus was born. They were already creating gigantic effigies of human beings, man, made of wicker, which would be set on fire. But inside the wicker effigy, you would put animals, crops, grains, chickens, and you would also be required to place human beings. The Druids would decide, okay, this family has to give up one of their children to, SAH-WEEN, the Lord of the harvest. And if you don't, everybody dies. And so you didn't want to starve out, because the only way you could survive is by growing crops. So you would give up your youngest child to be part of the Wicker Man ceremony. And then they tried to make it into, this is a great honor. SAH-WEEN has chosen your child. That's a great honor. Your family's going to be highly blessed for the coming year. And then you do, 5 or 6, different village kids will get taken, put inside the Wicker Man, and eventually on their whole holy high day, which was at the end of the harvest season on October 31st, because November 1st, the Druid New Year would begin. So on October 31st, you would have this big bonfire party, and the bonfires, like you said, would be set throughout the land. Back in ancient Britannia, you do it on the night of October 31st throughout the land, and that's where in the Midwest we got traditions of bonfires, which were really originally called bonfires, because you would put bodies in there and you would burn all the flesh off, and all you would have left after the fire went out would be bones. And so you burn people to death, just like you would do in the Wicker Man. And so the Wicker Man ceremony was started by the Druids back in the 2300s BC, before Christ. And so these Celtic people were under the control of these Druidic priests. These are the forebears of the Aryans that Adolf Hitler was so obsessed with. These blonde-haired, blue-eyed god-men. I don't know if these people, or some portion of these Aryans, were remnants of the leftover Nephilim who were destroyed in the flood, but who the Bible says would appear after the flood. There were Nephilim in the earth in those days, the days of Noah's flood, and also after that. And it could be, but the forebears of the Aryans supposedly led to the Indo-European people, which were the Kelts, who were Scots Gaelic, and they eventually moved to Britain. But the Harvest Festival of October 31st just became known as SAH-WEEN, which was sort of, the name of the god of the harvest. And so on October 31st, you would make your blood sacrifice to him, and he would make your crops grow the next year. And so we again have the ancient Babylonian paganism, which really starts in the Garden of Eden, but moves forward through Nimrod, Tower of Babel, into the Druidic sacrifices of the early times, prior, the same time that, the laws being established in Israel and Moses is getting the Ten Commandments. We find that, and we'll get to these scriptures before the teaching is over, we'll find out that even ancient Israel, after they received the law of Moses, got involved in doing what? Sacrificing the children to gods. Why? To make the crops grow. To make because part of them, we trust in the God of Israel, but sometimes he does things, he gets mad and talks to us, so a portion of Israel was engaging in Druidic pagan sacrifices. And we know that because we look at the verses in the Old Testament where it says, God says it's an abomination the things you do to make your children pass through the fire. And then some of the nations surrounding Israel would change the name of SAH-WEEN, the ancient Celtic Indo-European god, to Moloch or Marduk or some of the other names. And so Israel began practicing Moloch worship, offering their child to be burned in a giant metal effigy of the god of the Sidonians and the Phoenicians, Moloch, who used to be SAH-WEEN, who was actually Satan in one of his multiple disguises as a god. But always, 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 he requires human beings to kill themselves and particularly their children because he receives or obtains some type of energy or power from that. And we see that as a part and parcel of Satanism today and the higher levels of witchcraft. Lower levels of witchcraft, you're told you're worshiping the goddess principle. The earth is your mother goddess, and you go down to the woods to do things to help nature grow and all these wonderful things. And then as you get higher and higher in real witchcraft, you find out that at the end of the day, the guy running the whole show is Satan. And he just gives women who want feminist empowerment the disguise or the allure or the deception that he gave to their mother Eve in the Garden of Eden. That women can be on top, women can be in charge, you can run your own show and become a goddess. Really you can't, because Satan's going to be the god of this world until Jesus comes and removes him. And we saw in Revelation 17 and 18 that Satan uses this goddess-based worship system that really started back in 2400 BC in Nimrod and Semiramis' attempt to establish the New World Order, the one world government in ancient Babylon. That will work its way all the way through to the tribulation period when the Antichrist comes to the earth. When the Antichrist takes power, he's going to use a false form of Christian religion, which will be a modern day iteration of ancient Babylonian paganism, in that it will be based upon goddess worship. You think, well, how is goddess worship going to work in Christianity? Roman Catholic Church, my friend. Right? Anybody know about the Roman Catholic Church and their Virgin Mary? The Queen of Heaven is the title that they give to this fertility goddess, who is not the Mary of the Bible, who is the mother of Jesus. No, it's this new satanic invention that the Catholic Church has been deceived into exalting into goddesshood status. The fertility virgin goddess, Queen of Heaven, who is by name condemned by God in the Old Testament, so that there will be no mistake, and that the Catholic Church chose that title to attach to the fertility goddess, shows you that God is just, that he forced whoever the machinations of the people that created the Roman Catholic system, which we're going to look at in detail today and next week as well, to choose that title. Why? So that people like you would have no excuse for deception. You knew that the Roman Catholic Church couldn't be true biblical Christianity because the God that they worship isn't Jesus, the kinsman redeemer, the last Adam, the second man, but the real God of the Catholic Church is the fertility goddess, the Virgin Mary, the Queen of Heaven. And so you know that that's not biblical because you see that condemned throughout the Bible. So, but anyway, so we go forward. So the ancient Celts, controlled by the Druidic priests, who are the men of oak, or the oak men, which is why they call themselves the Druid, because they worship gods that supposedly lived in inanimate objects like oak trees, and they would do their blood sacrifices out in the woods, surrounded in groves of oaks. And the groves, the high holy places, and the sexual and blood sacrifice rituals of the groves also crept into ancient Israel and was condemned. So, other things that came about at about that time, that the Celtic people made as part and parcel of their own, ritualistic ceremonies was to do what? Well, it was to create a tradition where you would dress up as demons. Now, why would you do that? Well, you do the Wicker Man, and you would do the Wicker Man on Halloween every October 31st. You would burn people alive. And so that was so disturbing that we find out that eventually even the Roman Empire said this is too barbaric. And during the Gallic War, Julius Caesar made a comment about it, which we'll look to. But dressing as demons, going door to door, trick or treating, all of those things really came about as a result of traditions that were started by the Celtic Druids back in 2400 BC. Eventually, this type of blood sacrifice controlled and went through biblical times. Israel was separated from them. Remember, God was so big on keeping the Jews from marrying with other people. Why? Because he hated Gentiles, or he was a racist, or he's a bigot, or he's an ethnic cleanser? No. Because the other pagan peoples of the world who weren't Jewish were so ingrained in satanic ceremony and rituals that they were killing their own babies. And God didn't want Israel to take part in that. So he separated for himself out a people called after his own name. That's why they call themselves Israel, a prince with God. And so God kept them separated from the pagan nations because Satan had such a foothold in the hearts and minds and bodily activities of the pagan nations of the time. So we see that God is working his redemption, salvation plan, leading all the way up to the cross. And eventually Jesus is born. And when Jesus is born, what does he do? He's going around from town to town casting out demons. And demons are, again, the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim who have nowhere to go because they can't go to heaven because they're not sons of Adam. And they can't go to the lake of fire. The lake of fire isn't open for business yet. And so they can't go to Hades either because only the deceased human beings who are waiting to be judged are in Hades. You never find any verses in the Bible where it says fallen angels and human beings are sharing torment together until you get to the end of time at the lake of fire. Hades is for human beings. But you get these people who write these books. I saw another guy on television this week who went to hell. Oh, I went to hell, and the demon was there and he tore my chest open. And he could never explain why. If the demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, wouldn't they be in greater trouble? Wouldn't God be more mad at them than they are at human beings? So how did you get to, after you got saved, you went to hell, and you were powerless in hell because you were hot, and you couldn't move your limb, and you could barely crawl. But the demons could run around freely and have fun by tearing your chest open with their claws. And they're like, oh, this is wonderful. Why wouldn't the demons be suffering more than humans since they committed even greater crimes? So you know that people are making stuff up under demonic delusion. Satan goes into the church and creates counterfeit Christians who give a false narrative of what hell is like. And all these people, this guy that I saw on television last week was on some Christian television station. Weeks. That's right.
Exactly. That's
right. I actually bought his book.
23 minutes in hell.
Yes. Now, there was a follow-up, and I forgot what it said. A follow-up was called like another 23 minutes in hell. He went back again. For the second edition, God, did him the favor of sending this supposedly born-again person to hell, not once, but twice, so that his contract with Harvest House could be honored and he could write a follow-up edition.
He's a Florida guy.
Is he?
Yes.
See, Albert, then you are on top of this stuff, man. Counterfeit Christianity. I'm telling you guys, the apostasy, the departure from biblical truth is here. So he says he went to hell and demons were torturing him. It doesn't make any sense because there's nothing in the Bible that says demons are in Hades and nobody's in hell because the lake of fire is empty right now. So that that guy, what's his name? Weiss? I forgot his first name.
Yeah.
He's a false prophet. He's a fake Christian, and you shouldn't buy any of his books. Anybody that talks about, hey, I'm writing a book about when I went to hell, they're lying. Because it's unscriptural, right? Because once you're born again, Jesus already paid. So that's rank blasphemy to say that somebody that's already born again got sent to hell, even for 23 seconds. Because Jesus already paid. Why would the Father send you to hell for a sin debt that you don't know anymore? Unless Jesus' death on the cross isn't as efficacious as he thinks it is. So, blasphemy. Okay, so the apostasy is here. So the rapture should be coming soon. But before it does, let me get through the rest of the teaching. So, 4700 AD is the next big point on our calendar. And it's at the Battle of Actium, maybe, during the Gallic Wars, when Rome was able to defeat the Druids who had occupied what was then the Roman Empire. Remember, Rome spread all the way out to incorporate Britannia. And so the British Isles, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, those were all under the control of the Druid Celtic priests who had sort of migrated from other parts of Europe and Asia to take up residence in the British Isles. And so when Rome spread westward and took over parts of Britannia, they had to do battle with the Druids. And it's reported that during the Gallic War, Julius Caesar, before he became the emperor, was a general or whatever, and he saw the barbaric practices of the Druid priests, where they would kill their own people, including their own children. And he said, this is so barbarous that even though we incorporate all the religions of all the people that we conquer into our empire, so long as you recognize ultimately that Caesar is God as well, you're good. But they were like, nah, this stuff is crazy, where you're burning your children alive, and you got the Druidic altar, Stonehenge. Stonehenge is just a gigantic Druidic altar where people were sacrificed to the god of the harvest, the Lord of the harvest, SAH-WEEN. And so Druidism was outlawed by even the barbaric Roman Empire. This is too barbaric even for Rome. Druidism was outlawed. So now, these satanic practices that were openly practiced by the pagan nations are now outlawed, and they have to go underground, which gives rise to our Masonic practices, Masonry. What you have now is Satanism being outlawed by the Roman Empire. Rome is running the whole world now, and so now you've got to go on the down low and do stuff in secrets. Now going out to the woods and doing things in secret ceremonies, now that takes on an especially important, significance. So we see that the Mystery Babylon sun god system starts way back 2500 BC by Nimrod, who's also known as Marduk, who's also known as Osiris, the Egyptians. But, we find out that his wife, Semiramis, she's also known as Ashtaroth by the Phoenicians. Remember, Ashtaroth makes several appearances in both the Old and New Testimony, and God condemns Ashtaroth. Oh, you've done things, Ashtaroth, your God. And Ishtar, Isis, other names for Semiramis. And eventually, again, it goes underground 47 AD. And so now, by 500 AD, now we've got a new, sort of a paradigm or a new shift of ancient Babylonian paganism, which we see started way back here in the Tower of Babel. And I would say at about between 47 AD, when Rome defeats the Celtic Druids in the Gallic Wars, Druidism goes underground. But now, from 47 to 300 AD, we have Druidism, which is now being syncretized into Roman paganism. Because Rome is a pagan state, right? And the pagan state of Rome practices paganism. And so what do we see? We see that eventually the practice of the Druids, which is now underground, is kind of adopted into certain Roman traditions like goddess worship. Pomona was the goddess that Rome worshipped, and bobbing for apples was one of the traditions. It was a syncretization of ancient Druidic practices with modern Roman practices. Pomona was the goddess of the harvest, and she would make apples grow and things of that nature. So, tradition, for instance, of bobbing for apples that we now have as part of our Halloween zeitgeist actually started out by the Druids as a practice when the Druid priests would come around the village and say, okay, we're going to have to sacrifice one of your children to the Wicker Man. But there's one way out, though. There is, sort of like the way they did with, Pontius Pilate did with Barabbas. Like, oh, there is a way out on Passover. You can vote for one of your guys to be set free, and it's going to be Jesus or it's going to be Barabbas. So there was a way out of, being sacrificed in the Wicker Man, and that was to bob for apples. So what they would take is this gigantic witch's cauldron. In Halloween you have these witches, and they have the witches brew, and there's a big giant black cauldron with a fire beneath it, and this boiling pot of stuff inside. Well, that actually happened. The Druids would have a practice where they take a giant iron cauldron, and they would boil things in it. So you'd have this pot of boiling liquids. In some cases, some people suggest that it was oil. It was like, like that you would fry chicken in. Others say it was boiling water, and they put, fruits in it, like apples. And they would heat it. Water boils at about 230 degrees Fahrenheit. And they would say, okay, I'm going to stick the apple in the pot, in the cauldron water. And if you can grab it with your teeth the first time in, you get to get out of the Wicker Man. Or you can just go in the Wicker Man and where your destruction is guaranteed. And so people would sign up to try to bob for apples, which started out as, which in Rome was this benign, wonderful, beautiful goddess creature who had an armful of apples, But the ancient Druids from the Celtic tradition into Europe, they knew that the apple ceremony involved the person who was designed or designated for death in terms of the Wicker Man, because October 31st had rolled around, and while they didn't call it Halloween yet, they called it SATANIC to honor the god of the dead, the Lord of the harvest. So they would go up and they'd stick their face down into the boiling water, and if they couldn't grab it the first time, they'd get the Wicker Man anyway. But even if they could, even if they were lucky enough to be able to grasp the apple with their teeth and pull it out, the heat from the boiling fluids and liquids inside the pot would be so great that their skin would melt like wax. So anybody that survived would be horribly disfigured from their head probably to mid-chest and back with scars that would never heal. And you wouldn't be able to tell who the person was because their face would be permanently disfigured. Also, many of the people would have their hearing lost because the hot liquids would go down the ear canal and destroy the nerves that are very sensitive in the ear canal, so they'd be deaf, and it would go into the eyes and destroy the very sensitive natures that surrounds the ocular nerves and all of that. So you'd be blind, deaf, and permanently disfigured, clinging to life. And that's the difference between somebody that's a born-again Christian, by the way, and somebody who's not. You'd rather face death. You stick your head in a boiling pot of oil and grab the apple, and we'll let you live another 20 years, and you get out of the Wicker Man. You're like, you must be crazy. I'm going to see Jesus today. Sign me up, and you can walk yourself over to the Wicker Man and light the match for him. And, that's because you have a hope beyond the grave. And that's the real victory that Jesus gives us. The victory over the what? Fear of death. And we find that right in Scripture. It says that He delivered us, not just from death, but from the fear of death, which throughout our whole lives captivates and enslaves us. You're a slave while you're alive if you're not born again. Why? Because you're afraid to die. Because you know that beyond the grave is eternal. There's a boiling cauldron of oil, and you're going to burn there forever and ever. So if all you got to do is stick your face in a boiling pot of oil and disfigure yourself for life, if you get another 20 years out of it, you get to avoid being thrown in the real boiling cauldron of fire forever. So you're going to cling to life at whatever the cost, because you're so desperate to keep yourself alive. And that's the sad and pathetic thing about living in these physical bodies in this physical world. Each day, your body is getting older, and you're one day closer to the grave. Each day, the world is one day closer to destruction. Each day, we're getting closer to the end of the show. And the show isn't going to end well for the vast majority of people. It's going to end very badly. So you've got to cling to this, like, oh, I hope the sun doesn't go down. Oh, the sun went down. That means, oh, well, midnight. Oh, one more day, TikTok, it's clicked off my calendar. I've got one less day to live. And if you're not a born-again believer, you don't have any hope for the future. If you're a pagan and you're doing all these blood sacrifices of your children, you don't have any clear conscience because the Holy Spirit speaks out through nature. We find in Romans chapter 1, it says, the very creation itself foretells the majesty of God so that they are without excuse. You're sacrificing your kids to the devil. I don't care if he calls themselves Samhain or SAH-WEEN or whoever he calls himself. You got to know that's wicked. To take your little baby and burn him to death to make some god of the harvest happy so your crops grow so you can have a lot of extra corn in your barn over the wintertime. You got to have some guilt about that. And you got to feel that when my day of judgment comes, it's not going to go well. So you want to cling to life as much as possible because you're afraid for your day of judgment to come. But when you're in Christ, after you're born again, you don't care if you live or die. In fact, Paul and radical Christians like him, which I'm becoming more and more like that every day, you want to get killed early so you can get into the kingdom faster than everybody else. And if you get yourself KIA, as they call it in the military, killed in action, you get a special martyr's crown that makes you a special kid. You get the Gold Star Award when you go to heaven. You won't be just one of the other occupants of heaven. You'll be a special VIP resident of heaven forever. So go out and get yourself killed for Jesus. That's a plus, my friend. So you got to do your work. But at the very least, you aren't dreading death. Because death isn't a problem for us. Death is the beginning of Christmas vacation for the kid who's been, I'm going to class studying all winter long, I can't wait for Christmas break. You're the kid who can't wait for summer to begin, man. Remember that? The last day of school? Oh, that was magic. I remember you get on the bus, man, you take your paper and you throw them all over, like, I haven't studied anything for 3 months, man. That was a magical time. When you're a kid, you have to worry about taxes, jobs, wives, girlfriends, child support, any of that stuff. All you had to do, you got 3 months to play. I'm going to stay up as late as I want. I can sleep in as much as I want. I'm going fishing. I'm going to ride my bike. I'm going to go play. And you could play all day long for 3 consecutive months. It was great. I love it. I love being a kid. Growing up in the Midwest was awesome. I'm sure down in Alabama, very similar to Michigan. Go fishing, man. Go adventuring. Exploring the woods. It was just great. And so that's what it's like to be a born again Christian. You're looking forward to that. Quitting time. You get to be a kid again. You get to play forever. And that's what's waiting for us that are born again. So we don't have to dread death. Like, the doctor said, the tumor's inoperable. Oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. Mayo. Like, don't worry about it. Don't put yourself out. We have grief counselors that can speak to you in this time of trouble for you. No, don't even worry about it, man. I'm good. Sign me out, I'm on my way. And that's it. Steve's going to go out and pass out some extra tracks that weekend, make sure he gets a little bit more in the bank account before he gets home to heaven. And that's the attitude for us. And that's, if you're really born again, that's going to be your attitude too. Because this place, this planet Earth, is a place of work. It's boot camp. You're being trained for your leadership position in the millennial kingdom of Christ and in eternity. This isn't meant to be your home. That's what that verse in Hebrews chapter 10 or 11 is. It says, we are strangers and pilgrims in the earth. We have we have here no continuing city, Paul said. Because if we were permanent residents here, we'd have a chance to stay. But now we're looking forward to a new city that is to come, the new Jerusalem that descends down from God out of heaven. So our citizenship is in heaven. And the King James Version says our conversation. That means our citizenship is in heaven. So anyway, the people who were under the control of the Celtic Druids, those guys, they weren't born again, so they'd stick their head in a boiling pot of oil to keep themselves alive for a little while longer. And that horrific practice of bobbing for apple, as well as other things like trick-or-treating and going door to door. Trick-or-treating, actually, just a quick aside, that was also a tradition that sort of arose in the Druidic-controlled villages of the British Isles, in that on October 31st, which was the Day of the Dead, this was the day of the harvest. The end of the harvest had come. Samhain means, literally, it's spelled SAMHAIN. Okay, spell it for us now, Albert, because
You said you
did I? Okay, sorry. SAMHAIN, but it's pronounced Samhain because it's ancient Gaelic Celtic language, and so that literally means summer's end. And so at the end of summer, October 31st, it was also believed to be the time when all of the dead would be able to pierce through the veil. The veil between the living and the dead was the thinnest. In one tradition, it says all the people that died during that year would come back out of their graves that night to go and look for the people that they used to live with. And so a tradition started wherein on October 31st, and it's, as a matter of fact, what time? It's, a Charlie Brown Christmas. Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, Halloween, which is the second most popular Charlie Brown, Charles Schulz cartoon, is ending just as we speak. And, it popularized Halloween so much to the extent that it made it mainstream. Halloween became very mainstream American. We'll look at how the progression worked when we get to the United States. But right now, we're still back in, the 300s AD.
Dark Ages.
And in fact, even before the Dark Ages. But Halloween and trick-or-treating were interrelated in that on that day, which was known as SAH-WEEN's Day, or the Day of the Lord of Harvest, people would dress up in scary costumes. Why? Because not only would the dead come forth out of the grave to look for the homes they used to live in the neighborhood, but the demons, the hobgoblins, these devils that lived in it. How about that? That's a word for you.
Schmegel.
Right, there you go. How about that? So you bring a mask next week. Remember that the first year I did? I brought a little mask and we did all. It was very interesting. So also these disembodied spirits, but also these demonic entities that they called hobgoblins or called the sprites and the fairies and all these different little creatures of the woods of antiquity would come forth out of the woods and come forth out of this ether world that was very close to ours. There's a veil that kept them from interacting with humans, but on October 31st, that veil could be pierced because it was the thinnest, because it was the end of the summer harvest and the beginning of the winter, meaning the life cycle of the planet Earth was now giving way to the cycle of death, and the dead could come forth. So the tradition started that these creatures would go from door to door. They could manifest on this night in human form. Not necessarily looking like human, but in material form. They'd be little monstrous little creatures, and they would go from house to house, and they would do mischievous things, unless they were mollified. They would be mollified by you leaving out sweetmeats or baked goods or food of some type. And you leave it outside your door, and they would come and get it, and they would feed themselves off of it, and they'd move on. But if you didn't leave a treat for them, they could burn your house down and kill your whole family, or kill all your livestock in the barnyard in the back of your house. And so people were terrorized by these demonic entities. These are really just the demons of the New and Old Testament that are manifesting themselves in a paganized people who are afraid of things that go bump in the night. They have a right to be and a reason to be scared of things that go bump in the night, but Satan brilliantly was able to disguise himself as some kind of fertility sky goddess, harvest god, and these are his little helpers or whatever, as opposed to saying what they really were, fallen angels and the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim killed in the flood, who were under the condemnation of God. But because they had not accepted the law of Moses and the Old Testament that the Jewish people sort of brought about and was able to spread amongst their own people, but it wasn't until Jesus came and said, go therefore and preach the gospel, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and go into all nations, preach the gospel, baptize in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And that's the Great Commission of Matthew chapter 28, verses 19 and 20. Prior to that, the whole world was living under darkness, under fear of death, and under this slavish series of ancient Babylonian pagan religious groups that all required human blood sacrifice, doing terrible things like leaving out food for demons and devils, or else they would come and destroy your house and kill your family. This is what Jesus delivered us from. And that's why he went to the Jew first. But then the first thing he did was say, go to all nations now. Because he wanted to liberate all of the sons of Adam. So we owe a debt to the Jewish people because Jesus is a Jew. And he came from out of a people separated from paganism and the ancient Druidic practices that everybody else on earth was, participating in under various different names and sub-traditions, but it was the same thing. Satan requiring human blood sacrifice. Israel was rescued from that, and when they stepped out of line, God disciplined them harshly. And that's why he disciplined them so harshly, because he needed to keep them pure. So when the Messiah came through, he could be fully human and would be part of a religious paradigm that doesn't involve sacrificing your children to Satan. And so that's the real purpose of the gospel, to now go to the pagan nations of the world. And man, that's why Christianity, or followers of Jesus, it spread like wildfire throughout the pagan world. Whereas in Israel, where it originated, it had a hard time. Paul couldn't get the gospel preaching. Forget you guys, from now on, I'm going to the Gentiles. And he went off to Rome and started a church there. And the reason why was because what? The Jews were kind of spoiled, because they always had the God of the Bible. He disciplined them enough, every now and then he'd kick a little butt here and there. But he was always the God of the Bible. He was just and merciful and kind, didn't require human blood sacrifice, didn't require you to kill your kids. So they were kind of spoiled. When Jesus came along, it was like, we got Judaism, we don't really need this new thing. But you take that Jesus to these people who all their lives, throughout all their traditions, had been trying to avoid starving to death in the wintertime by having to sacrifice their kids to the devil disguised as SAH-WEEN. They're like, we don't have to kill our kids anymore. We don't have to volunteer to be burned in the Wicker Man. We're not going to have the Druid priest come knock on the door and say, hey Steve, your number's up this year. Off to the Wicker Man, bro. We don't have to live like that anymore? No. So the pagans took to it like a fish takes the water, and Christianity spread throughout the pagan countries. And that's why Rome eventually became overcome with Christianity. Christians were being taken and thrown to the lions in the Roman Colosseum, and yet it still spread. Why? Because the pagan Romans, which had adopted all of the ancient false gods of Greek antiquity, Jupiter and Athena and all of these things, and at the same time, as I said, from 47 AD onward, the Druid priests who had gone underground were now working their way into the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church hadn't been invented yet, but it was in the process. Because what? Because Rome became the world empire. And eventually, a terrible thing happened on the way to the Catholic Church being created. In 325 AD, what happens? Constantine, who was the Caesar, was so befuddled by, we've been trying to kill off these Christians now for 300 years. We throw them to the lions, we cut their heads off, we burn them alive, and they keep spreading like lice, like cockroaches. They multiply in the dark or something like that. And so Christianity began to spread and eventually began to take over the Roman Empire. And so Constantine supposedly has a vision. I think he had a satanic vision, and he was told, hey, I'm God, and in this sign you're going to conquer. The red cross. It was really the cross of Malta, not the cross of the Bible, but the red cross of Malta, which we now see in New World Order and New Age groups. And he was told, you're going to be the chief champion of the Christian church and whatever. And overnight, the Edicts of Toleration were signed, which now made Christianity no longer a capital offense in the Roman Empire. You couldn't be killed for being a Christian anymore. And then very shortly after that, it went from being simply tolerated, which is what the Edicts of Toleration said, all right, we're going to tolerate your madness and we're not going to kill you anymore for being a follower of Jesus. Shortly after that, Christianity became the official state religion. So now you have the terrible, terrible incident where for the first time in history, Christianity in the name of Jesus is now the official, come Mercedes-Benz, the official sponsor of the Super Bowl, Christianity, the official sponsor of the pagan Roman Empire. And that's exactly what you had happen in 325 AD. And so now you've got Diocletian and Constantine and these people are now syncretizing together a belief in Jesus with the ancient pagan practices of Rome. But the ancient pagan practices of Rome always had a little bit of Druidism involved in it. Why? Because the Druids had power. They had real occultic supernatural powers. They just had to do their human blood sacrifice out in the woods in secret because it was against the law in Rome to do it. Didn't mean they didn't do it because Rome was such a pagan place. It's hard to keep a good guy down. And paganism was doing really well in all the preceding empires prior to Rome, and it did well in Rome as well. But Satan got a little more clever and said, we're going to take this Christianity thing over. And now, instead of having Druidic priests running the Celtic religion of Druidism, you had Roman priests running this new religion, which was a syncretization of pagan Rome and the practices of pagan Rome with what? Christianity, or Christianity falsely so-called. This new state-run form of Christianity was headed up by priests, and eventually the Roman Catholic Church evolved from out of that. As the Roman Empire faded into obscurity and became the Holy Roman Empire, remember Roman Empire and all of that, it became a religious military paradigm. And so now, instead of Druidic priests running the show, you had Catholic priests running it. Because you only had one church in the whole world, because the Roman Empire controlled the whole world. And since they controlled the church, you had one church to control the whole world. And that's why they called themselves Catholic, because they were universal. The universal church of the planet Earth was the Catholic Church of Rome. And so, deep down in secret, the Catholic priests were envious of the Druid priests who were still doing their Oak Man ceremonies out in the woods, and out in the groves. And they were like, man, we want some of that power.
Yep.
And so you had a syncretization between the Catholic priests and the Druidic priests, because the Druidic priests had real supernatural powers. This wasn't make-believe Harry Houdini stuff. They had real power as sorcerers. The Catholic Church wanted in on that. The Catholic priests eventually secretly adopted in a lot of Roman pagan, Babylonian pagan practices, because it had power attached to it, even though it was officially against the law. And you see how Babylonian paganism crept into a false religion that was falsely called Christianity. That's what Roman Catholicism has always been. Catholicism was never a legitimate form of Christianity that kind of went off the tracks later on. It was always a false counterfeit form of Christianity that was created by the Roman emperor himself to control the masses better. And so, when he started changing the names of these pagan practices that Rome had adopted from ancient Babylon, they started giving them Christian names. And so, I'm going to explain everything to you so you guys don't have to, like you stand there like, right here. Professor Bossy said, look at me.
We'll get to that.
Pin down. It's an important point. And so, now what you have happening is that you have ancient Druidism, SAH-WEEN, being Christianized. And so the day that was used in Roman paganism to celebrate the people that had died, that were part of the church, the Day of the Saints was in like May 13th or something like that. And that day was moved to November 1st. Why? To compete with the Druids who were still going out into the woods doing their Wicker Man ceremonies and their secret blood sacrifices to SAH-WEEN, who is now the secret mystery Babylon. Remember, Babylon went down in secret, and Babylon became a mystery religion because it had to go into secrecy in the present Roman setup. And so, to compete with that, now Rome, which had become Christianized in 325 AD, couldn't very well go along with satanic human blood sacrifices of children. So you found that the day that was set aside to celebrate people in the Catholic Church that had died was November 1st. That was the first day of the new year for the pagan Druids, by the way. And it was really the first day it's really winter beginning. The harvest cycle ended on October 31st. The day before that would be what? The day of the harvest. SAH-WEEN is what the Druids call it, in honor of their god, SAH-WEEN, or Samhain, who was the god of the harvest. And so they competed with one another. And so what eventually became Halloween was the recognition that on October 31st, it would be SAH-WEEN's night, and the next day would be the Day of the Dead Catholic Saints, which became known as the Day of the Dead. If you notice, if you study any Catholicism, you'll see that they have an unnatural obsession with death and skulls. They got the monastery on Mount Sinai in the Sinai Peninsula that's filled with human skulls. Where do they get all those skulls? Goodness forbid. What are they doing in that monastery in the middle of the night when tourists aren't there, right? They've got thousands of human skulls in the basement, in the dungeon. And so they've always been obsessed with death. So the Day of the Dead was November 1st. The day before the Day of the Dead, and those dead were the saints. So they call it November 1st, the Day of the Saints, or the hallowed ones of the Lord. And the day before that would be the evening of the Day of the Saints. So this title, or this name, eventually became known as All Hallows Evening, meaning the night before the day. Like kind of Christmas Eve and then Christmas Day. The day before All Hallows Day would be All Hallows Eve. And the contracted form in the Gaelic, Scots Gaelic tongue, Ian, E''En. And eventually it became contracted more, instead of All Hallows Evening to All Hallows Inn, or just Halloween, because it was the day of the Hallows, of the set apart saints, evening, meaning the night before. And that's where the title that we now use today, Halloween, is really sort of a slightly anglicized form of an ancient Celtic Scots Gaelic word for All Hallows Evening, which was the night before the Day of the Dead, November 1st, which was Halloween, or October 31st, which was Samhain's Day, the day of this dead god who could control who lived and who died. So now you've got Halloween syncretized together with the Catholic Church and the Day of the Dead. And so now we can move on and we can take a look and see that, in 500 AD, Pope Gregory, who was the head of the Catholic Church during the beginning of the Middle Ages, this guy takes this All Hallows Eve and spreads this throughout Britannia, and it becomes, in 500 AD, a Catholic sacrament, meaning that you have to participate in this, and if you don't, you can't go to heaven. And so the Catholic Church will set up all these rules and regulations about if you don't do this, you don't do that. So again, Halloween isn't a Christian tradition. It's an ancient Babylonian tradition that became a Druidic practice that became a syncretized Druidic Roman Catholic Church tradition. And so Catholicism and Halloween kind of go hand in hand. And we'll see that that's how it snuck into the United States of America eventually. But, again, Pope Gregory, rechristened the day All Saints Day and changed the date, and you got November 1st, and All Hallows Eve became Halloween. And so it was about this time that a tradition turned up where people in Europe, the turnip gourd was a popular plant. There was a tradition where you would carve a face into the turnip gourd. And remember, we had dressing up as part and parcel of an ancient Druidic practice, because the demons and the devils would come along and go into your neighborhood. So, as part and parcel of leaving treats out at the doorstep for the little devils and demons, they also decided, hey, let's do this thing where, if you can't beat them, join them. So the demons would come along looking for humans to torment and torture and to basically extort. It's like the mafia coming into your neighborhood and say, hey, you want to keep your little restaurant on the corner? We run the whole waterfront. You got to pay protection money. And so you pay protection money every October 31st to the little devils and demons that would come to your door by leaving food out for them. And so some smart, enterprising person thought, you know what? In order to be able to roam through the town on that night, you didn't want to be out and get caught. It's like, there's a son of Adam. Let's torment him and take him out into the woods and maybe kill him. You would dress up as a devil or a demon. The idea was that you would trick the real devils and demons into leaving you alone. Because they'd be tooling down the street looking for a human to torment. Because they hate humans. Why? Because we were created in the image of God, and we're going to inherit the new heaven and the new earth, and we're going to reign and rule with Jesus. But before we start doing that, we, the sons of Adam, are going to judge Satan and all of the fallen angels and all the Nephilim demons and decide what part of hell we want them to go into. Jesus is going to judge all the unsaved, fallen sons of Adam, and the regenerate, born-again sons of Adam are going to judge the devil and all the fallen angels and all the demons that went bump in the night and kept you up as a kid and tormented you. God's going to reveal, this is the guy that was messing with you when you were a kid. This is Morbius. This is the guy that was messing with your feet and then playing with you when you were... Oh, okay. Yeah, I remember you. Like 3rd grade, pretty much through junior high school. Yeah, okay, let me see. And you're going to get to sign where he goes into the lake of fire. It's awesome. It's glorious. So they get this sticking it to us now, but our day is coming, my friend. Revenge. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. Vengeance is going to be ours too, because we're going to get to judge them. And that day is coming. But, so at this time, what people would do is dress up in costumes so that they would be mistaken by the demons and devils as one of them. Like, oh, that's one of us. Oh, yeah. Police officers driving down the street and going, hey, what's up? And you keep going. And so you would dress up in costumes, one, to keep yourselves from getting molested by the real demons and devils that are roaming through the village for that one night, until sunrise. And they got to the point where, hey, it'd be clever. Let's go over to Steve's house. Knock on the door. If it can trick the devils into thinking, well, Steve's not the brightest dude ever. He went to Auburn, man. It's not like he went to Auburn back then. Let's go to Steve's house. And knock on the door, and true Auburn man, he's going to say, he's going to think it's a real devil. Oh, here's the candy bowl. And so, like I said, it was sweetmeats and baked goods back in the day. Now it's candy. And Steve's going to hand over a king's ransom of candy to the people that are dressed up as devils and demons. And they're like, hey, that worked pretty good. Let's do this again next year. And so the tradition of dressing up as devils and demons to extort goodies from your neighbor, or else we're going to burn your house down. Now people... Well, in some neighborhoods they burn your house down, but they in the Midwest they would soap your windows or throw eggs at your house or whatever, and things of that nature. So it was a trick or a treat. If you don't give us a treat, you're going to get a trick that you're not going to like so much. That's where trick-or-treating came from. That's where dressing up in scary costumes comes from. Real practices involving real people, where real people were being killed and or tormented by real demonic entities who were not yet imprisoned in hell and are free to roam the earth. And so, there you go. There's another one of our Halloween traditions that bites the dust when you look at it in the real historical window. Some of these things. So now we'll talk real quickly about the jack-o'-lantern, and then we'll move on to the invasion of the United States by the ancient demonic practices of Halloween. The turnip gourd was big in Europe, and so at that time in Europe, these pagan practices and these druidic practices also included, a tradition that was popularized by the Irish about this guy named Jack. And Jack supposedly was walking through, Oak Grove in jolly old green Ireland one day, and he sees the devil up in a tree. Now, what the devil would be up in a tree doing, I don't know. They never really say in the story. But Jack, being enterprising young man, runs over and makes that pagan sign of the cross. Not the real cross of Calvary that Jesus was crucified on, but rather the sort of cross of Malta that the American Red Cross has adopted as their official symbol. And he makes that sort of plus sign at the bottom of the tree. And now, because paganism and Christianity are all syncretized together in Roman Catholicism, he makes the pagan form of the cross. You notice Catholics do that now. What they're doing is making the sign of Tammuz. That was the letter T for Tammuz, who was the son, supernatural, virgin-born son of Semiramis and Nimrod. Again, we can't escape Babylon. It dates all the way back to the mystery of Babylon, starting in ancient Babylon. And so when you see the priests and Catholics doing they're making the sign of Tammuz, this mystical, occultic Babylonian cross. So Jack, he runs over and makes the Catholic cross, which is actually the Tammuz plus sign, at the base of the tree that Satan's climbed up into to perform some mischief. And because the cross has magical, mystical powers, mystery Babylon, remember there's a lot of mystery going on, he can't come down from the tree. Because the cross, just like we sort of see that carried out in the B-grade movies like Bela Lugosi as Dracula. Remember, he was the vampire, and he'd come, but then you pull out the cross, and you go, the cross, and it's you'd hold the cross. That relates back to ancient Roman Catholic Babylonian paganism and the plus sign of Tammuz. So Jack puts the cross at the base of the tree. Satan can't come down. He's like, you trapped me. I got things to go do. I got people to go bewitch and bedevil and got hell to run. And he's like, I'll tell you what, I'll make a deal with you. I don't know if I'm going to make it into heaven because things aren't going so well and I don't think God likes me that much. If I don't get into heaven, the only other place for us to go is into hell. And then I'll become your responsibility. I'll tell you what, I'll let you out of the tree by scratching the cross off the tree. If you promise that if I don't make it into heaven, you won't drag me into hell. Here's a contract, sign me up. You're good to go. I'll never let you in hell ever, no matter what God does with it. Takes the cross off, Satan comes down the tree, goes on about his business. 20 years later, Jack's hit by a bus. Boom. They didn't have buses yet, so I guess it's a horse and buggy.
Yeah.
All right, so he's hit by a horse and buggy somewhere in merry old Ireland. And because he's a wicked guy, he can't get into heaven. And so, as he approaches the gates of hell, which is the only other place human souls go, Satan's about to drag him into one of the fire pits, and he says, remember me? It's me, Jack. You made a deal with me. I got the contract right here. And Satan is upset because his one great joy in life is to drag as many humans as possible into hell to torment them because he hates them, because we're all sons of Adam created in the image of God. And so what happens is Satan's like, doggone it, I got outfoxed by Jack. And he's like, yeah, kid, you're right. I signed, as if Satan would honor some contract.
Yeah.
But in the story, he does.
Sure.
But he's so ticked off at having been outfoxed by Jack, he reaches over to the fire pit, and he can't help throwing one at the head. Jack, he tries to beat him like a baseball pitcher or whatever. Jack ducks, and he misses him. But unbeknownst to Jack, because he can't get in heaven and he can't get into hell, he's got no place to be. So everybody that's human is either in heaven or in hell. And so Jack is in a world that has no other people. And he's a spirit being now, so he can't go back to his house to live with his family. So he's condemned to wander the earth, this disembodied spirit, in darkness all his life. So what does he do? He pulls a turnip gourd out of the ground, and he has like a spiritual pocket knife, I guess, and he carves a face into the turnip gourd, which is like kind of a long tuberous one. It looks almost like a cucumber almost. And he howls it out, and he takes the coal that Satan threw at him, and he drops it in to the turnip gourd, and he carries it around as his lantern to lighten his way, because he's walking around in perpetual darkness now. And so that's where the name of the jack-o'-lantern came from. Jack is sort of the contracted Irish form for John, which is sort of a synonym for man. Like, in the prostitution, the John went to the prostitute and paid her or whatever. So Jack and John sort of is a term, generic term for man. And so jack-o'-lantern really means the lantern of the man, or Jack's lantern. And so the term jack-o'-lantern derived from that tradition. So when the Irish potato famine occurred in 1840, most of the people that were impacted by that, they couldn't grow potatoes anymore because it was like some kind of bacterial blight, or I don't know, it was a virus or bacteria or whatever, but it caused rot in all of the potato crops, and that's what the main food that the Irish people were eating, the starch that they used to keep alive, and they couldn't grow enough of them, and they were starving to death. So in 1840, Irish potato famine instigated the largest Irish immigration in the history of the nation, and they all came basically to New York City. They came, Liberty Island, came off the boats, and went from New York to Boston and set up enclaves in both New York City and in Boston. And what did they bring with them? They brought with them their Roman Catholicism, Irish Catholics, because they were 99.9% Catholic then. And as a result, the United States of America was a Protestant evangelical nation. People don't really realize that in the 1700s, even as late as 1780, if you go to Philadelphia, you'll see like on the plaques there or whatever, Catholicism was against the law because they were thought to be controlled completely by the Pope's military CIA secret service force known as the Jesuits, the so-called Society of Jesus, founded by their priest Saint Ignatius Loyola. Started this basically military hit assassination squad that would control doctrine, and they eventually decided we can't kill everybody, so what we're going to do is we're going to indoctrinate them through education. So they say we're going to go to the university system. That's why Jesuit universities like Georgetown University, which is, by the way, the first Catholic university ever established anywhere in America. It was established in 1789. In Washington, D.C., the part of Washington, D.C. where Georgetown is located on the banks of the Potomac River, down in the Georgetown section of Washington. Georgetown is just an independent sort of colony. It wasn't even part of Washington, D.C. yet. Washington, D.C. didn't become the District of Columbia until like 6 months later that year when Maryland ceded land to the federal government and Virginia ceded some land, and it was combined together to create a federal district named after the goddess of the sky, Columbia. That's where we get the name Washington, D.C. Washington, named after George Washington, the district that really belongs to and is controlled by Columbia. Like, who's Columbia? Is that George's wife? No, that's the sky goddess, Semiramis, under one of her many iterations. Really, Satan dressed in drag. Semiramis, Columbia, Diana, Artemis, all Satan in a dress. And so what we find then is that in the 1700s, Catholicism was against the law. So you couldn't even come here because they were afraid that the Jesuits would cause, unrest and take over the government like they did during the French Revolution. Jesuits basically took over, and the French Revolution was very different than the American Revolution. And as a result of the French Revolution, remember it had liberty leading the people. It was like some big-breasted chick who was really a prostitute, and she pulled down her dress to expose her breast, and take over the world. It's like feminism and sexual debauchery, and we're going to take over the entire country and soon the whole world. And that's why you see that famous painting, liberty leading the people, with the big-breasted chick running down the street leading all these starving French peasants who are like, we're tired of being downtrodden. So they didn't want the Jesuits to come in and do the same thing in America. So Catholicism was banned. So, when you talk about Donald Trump and building a wall, they had a wall built that kept the Jesuits and the Roman Catholics out because they were considered to be pagans and disloyal and untrustworthy and a threat to the nascent, now growing, new United States of America. But the Irish potato famine, which occurred about 60 or 70 years after the United States of America is formed, caused these Irish Catholics to have to leave Ireland, and they came here and we allowed them in, because you're hungry, you're poor, you're tired, whatever, Statue of Liberty, which is sort of a made in stone manifestation of the goddess Columbia. And it was given to us by the French pagans who were led by the naked chick with the breast running down the street, liberty leading the people. By the way, Statue of Liberty wasn't made in New Jersey. It didn't come from California or some quarry in Arkansas. It came from the French. They were the Illuminists in France that wanted to use the United States as the base for the New World Order, which in fact they did. So we find then that with the Irish potato famine and the Irish Catholic immigrants came Halloween, which was already a budding sort of cultural holiday in Ireland and in the British Isles, but especially amongst Irish Catholics. And so it got here. And it took a while for Halloween to catch on. In, let's say, 1841, the Irish potato famine, it was mostly the Irish Catholics of Boston and New York City that practiced that. From about 1840 to about 1900 AD, the USA which had adopted SAH-WEEN, now adopts this sort of cultural modification, because America became a melting pot of many different cultures. Many European cultures came here, blended in with the Africans that were here already because of slavery, and became this rich melting pot of different cultures called the United States of America. And so it took a while for the 1840 Irish potato famine Irish Catholics to get their tradition out of the streets of New York City and Boston, and it started to spread westward into the middle west of America, Illinois, Michigan, you know, these different places, and then it began to take on a life of its own in about 1900. Now it became adopted as sort of a part of Americana. America's this new kid on the block of nations, and now we're the #1 industrial power, or soon to be the #1 industrial power in the world, and shortly after World War I, that's what would take place. And with it, Halloween began to spread as an American tradition as well, just like Thanksgiving did, and it was like we took Christmas and sort of made it an American tradition, though it had been practiced in Europe under different names long before, you know, it became popular in the United States. So Halloween did that very same thing, and so from 1900 onward, Halloween began to gain acceptance in the United States, and it's been pointed out that as of 2012, when I first put the stats together, Halloween was the most popular adult holiday. In 2012, the statistics showed that there were $8.2 billion in sales of Halloween-related candy, costumes, and related. And only Christmas in the porn industry, and I say that with no tongue-in-cheek, literally, only Christmas in the porn industry could generate more money per year than Halloween sales. And I had no idea that Halloween was that popular, but now it has. It's become an adult holiday, and you know, it's been suggested that some of the kids that grew up in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s now can remember as a kid, yeah, I remember dressing up in costumes, and they want to hold on to that piece of Americana, that nostalgia that they had as kids dressing up and going trick-or-treating, and that's why it's become so popular with adults now. It's become almost as popular in adult, you know, how more income is generated from sales to adults than it is to kids. Why? Because there's always a sort of the bacchanalian sort of element of excess, sexual and otherwise, and so that's why Halloween has gotten so popular. And so we've kind of run out of time, but yeah, we've laid down the scary costumes and Druidism. Now next week when we come back, when time ran perfectly, so we're going to cut off here and we're going to look at, you know, in essence, in conclusion, we could say that Druidism is back, but it's now disguised as an Americana nostalgic holiday. And it's doing well because America's most populous or most prosperous nation on earth. And so we've made it popular, we've made it a money-making industry, and so now everybody wants to participate in that. And I would say also that Wicca, you know, the statistics show that in 2012, Wicca had about 500,000 participants or members. That's, you know, 500,000 people as of 2012. Now I would say it's probably 750 to 800,000 people are participating in Wicca, which is really ancient Druidic goddess worship. And they say, oh, we're pagans, we worship the god. You don't worship the devil, you don't worship the devil yet. But as you get to the higher levels of Wicca, you eventually find, just like in the lower levels of Masonry, you don't know that the great architect of the universe that you're told about, but only vaguely in the shadows, is really Satan himself. That's the same thing with entry-level witchcraft. You get the junior high school girls to think it's cool to cast a spell, read a Harry Potter book, and by the time they graduate from college, they're ready for hardcore, real-deal witchcraft, which includes casting spells, which kill people and do all kinds of things. And you eventually find out that Wicca, witchcraft, Satanism, paganism, goddess earth worship, Druidism is all the same thing. And we saw just this past summer at the Burning Man ceremony in Mexico that a real live human blood sacrifice was done right on national television. I watched it myself. I was like, there's a dude in there, and well, he's on fire, and nobody did anything. Everybody just stood around. Oh, he must have had too much fun. He had some ecstasy and he ran into fire and nobody knew, and the guards were just caught off guard and let him burn himself to death. So Druidism is back in the form of Halloween. So the question is, as Halloween approaches a couple weeks down the road, is that something a Christian would want their kids or themselves to participate in. And so, our friend from, Way of the Master, Kirk Cameron, he's on, television on YouTube saying, Christianity, absolutely, Christians should celebrate Halloween. But ask yourselves this then, can you imagine Jesus dressing up as a Roman senator or a Roman emperor because Paul was throwing a big bash at his house? He's saying, hey, Jesus, come on, don't be a party poop, man. Put on your Roman pagan costume and come dressed up as Caesar. And we're going to have a bunch of drinks and lots of fun and whatever. Can you imagine the Apostle Paul dressing up as one of the demonic sorcerers that he dispossessed? Remember, he cast the demon out of the girl who was a sorcerer? Can you imagine him dressing up as a sorcerer at Peter's house, because Peter's throwing a bash at his house, and just for fun, he dresses up as some kind of ancient, occultic priest of Baal? Can you see the Apostle? Hey, dude, it's going to be crazy. Jesus is going to flip. I'm going to dress up as one of the priests of Baal. Right? That God locked up and had chopped to pieces and then burned to ashes? No, absolutely not. So, should we be trying, and I've heard people make the argument, well, we can Christianize it. We can take the Devil's Day and Christianize it. So I would ask the question, what is the Christian form of, or corollary of, child pornography? Is there a Christianized form of child pornography? Of course not. You just stay away from it. You don't try to Christianize child pornography, do you? Like put a little cross on the person as they're being raped? Or serial killing. You go into McDonald's and kill everybody. What do you pass out chick tracts just before you pull a gun and shoot everybody? You Christianize serial, you can't Christianize serial killing. You can't Christianize child pornography. You can't Christianize satanic, druidic blood sacrifice where people are killed. And as a result of that, the answer to me is crystal clear. Now, people can do whatever they want. Now, you could certainly use Halloween as a night to pass out tracts and do evangelism if you want to be creative, and I've read some really creative things doing that. But to participate, dressing up, scary costumes, scary music, giving out candy just for the sake of giving out, you're making a ritual sacrifice that was really the sort of offspring or offscouring of a human blood sacrifice. And then the candy you're giving out, that was a payoff to the demons and the devils not to kill your family or to kill your crops or kill your cattle. So the answer is, we are not to participate in the unfruitful works of darkness. Feeding devils and making them happy for one night a year. Is that fruitful or unfruitful? That's unfruitful. That's the unfruitful work of darkness. The Bible says, don't have any participation in the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them, which is what we've done tonight. And so, next week when we come back, we'll get into the scriptures that support all of the occultic nonsense that, I shouldn't even call it nonsense, the occultic tomfoolery, I would say is probably a better word, that we see being glorified through Halloween. Ghosts, goblins, witches, werewolves, scary things. Oh, but it's all just kids' fun. It's just make-believe. It isn't make-believe. They're all true. That's the joke on you. Satan's laughing in your face. You're dressing up as a little hobgoblin or as a witch or a devil, but it's all just make-believe. There is no real correlate. No, it's actually real. These entities do really exist, and we're going to find them in the Bible next week. Out.
And I'm going to close off with this. While some Christians still view Halloween as a celebration of the dead, Norma Joyce, the elder priestess of women in conscience creative action, sees it differently. I personally think Christianity is a religion of fear, Joyce said, but Wiccans are joyful people because we believe in life. She said Wiccans celebrate Hallowmass or SAH-WEEN based on the Celtic astrological degrees of the stars, and this year they will celebrate it on November 6th.
So everything she said was a lie, so just disregard what she said. That was propaganda from the devil. They're celebrating a false narrative. She's saying that Christianity is for losers. That's exactly what you would expect. She's a druidic priest, a witch, a Wiccan. So we shouldn't be participating in that, but not only should we not participate in it, we're supposed to proactively go out and expose that darkness and go out and do that by what? What we're already doing. We go out in the street evangelize. But when the Day of the Dead is approaching, when Satan, guarantee you absolutely for certain, they're going to be real live people right here in the United States of America, Van Cortlandt Park, where I used to run when I lived in New York City. They did satanic ceremonies there every Halloween, and Son of Sam, David Berkowitz did satanic blood sacrifice where people were killed in Van Cortlandt Park. You know, the same little park I would run through those trails in the woods in New York City, you know. And it's going to happen this year on October 31st. People are going to be killed here in the United States, in the Midwest, in Miami, in parts of the Southeast, in the Northeast, all over our fair land. Some unfortunate souls are going to be sacrificed to save. God help them if they're not saved. And some of these kids are kids that are in satanic generational families. I mean, generation after generation of families have received blessings and success from Satan. Just like in it, you see how the whole mafiosa sort of style confidence game, like extortion, like if you give me your kids, I'll give you success. Mm-hmm. It used to be crops. Crops used to be success. But now it's what? Wealth, influence, status, fame. Is not the Hollywood movie and music industry an absolute modern day reiteration of ancient Druidic pagan practices where superstars sacrifice somebody? In the old days, the Druidic priest would come and knock on your door of your little hut. We want your little kid and we're going to burn him in the Wicker Man. Now, if stories you read on the internet and things, the urban legends about how Jennifer Hudson, you know, like her whole family was killed. Like 2 days before she won like 6 Grammy nominations, she was like some no-name person who was on some talent show on TV who wants to be a singer or whatever the voice or whatever the typical singing show is. And you know, 2 years later, she's winning 6 Grammys, and Prince won 7 Grammys his whole career. She won it like the same amount, like the same night. But 2 days earlier, her whole family was killed. Like some random person broke into the house and killed everybody. Now people say, well, that was a blood sacrifice. She had to make a sacrifice to save him. Now I don't know, because I don't know any of those people involved, but it wouldn't surprise me. And we've heard things about, you know, Aaliyah was a famous R&B singer in 2001, died in this tragic plane crash. But she was dating this guy, Cayman Dash was it, who was some Hollywood music industry producer who was dating her. And you cannot convince people that her death was not a part of causing her and Jay-Z and some other people tied in with her, that she was involved romantically for them to you know, become big superstars in the industry. And the most common one that I hear is the one about Lady Gaga and how when she was a student at NYU in New York City, where David's going now, before she hit it big. And there was a girl that they were supposed to be making the big star, and it was her best friend, and they were co-recording, and it was this girl, because she was prettier, that the powers that be wanted to make the big star. And, you know, they were like, yeah, how badly do you want it? And she supposedly said, I'll do anything, which included pushing her friend off the high rise in lower Manhattan. She kind of wound up dead all over the ground. Next thing you know, this no-name girl from NYU, who isn't even that pretty, became the most phenomenally popular pop star in the history of the music industry, singing stuff called Poker Face, and you know, like, you know, the songs don't even have, they don't have a groove. There's nothing intrinsically appealing about any of her music, but yet she became the most popular person overnight. Now, can we prove that it was because of a blood sacrifice? I can't, but it wouldn't surprise me. I think that the old ancient Druidic practices where Satan requires people to make a decision. Are you willing? You've heard about Kanye West's mom, how she died getting plastic surgery? You die getting plastic surgery? Like now, when you hit the $20 million club or whatever the cutoff is, when you become a millionaire, okay, you can get involved in some sexual ritual. You want to hit the $100 million club, somebody gotta die, and not just any somebody. It's gotta be somebody real close to you, and you gotta make the call. Your dad, mom, or your kid. John Travolta's kid, dies. Mike Tyson's son died mysteriously. Bill Cosby's son dies mysteriously. Dr. J, his son gets, inside of the road changing a tire, and somebody walks up and kills him too. It just staggers me how all these famous rich people, black, white, Hispanic, whatever, in the entertainment industry, suffer some of the strangest, most incredible tragedies in the history of unsolved mysteries. And I think it all relates back to the ancient Babylonian paganism of the Tower of Babel, where Satan realized that people want to take shortcuts. And how did Satan learn that? Eve taught him that in the garden. Hey, you want a shortcut to reign and ruling forever and ever and ever? That won't take you 6,000 years? Actually 7,000 if you count the millennium. You can have it right now. Yeah. Rebel against God. Eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and you gotta make a sacrifice though. You can't just come home. Gotta get your husband to go down too. Oh, but he ain't got it very close. You can do it. You can use your womanly powers of persuasion. And women have been using that power of persuasion sexually forever. That is the Achilles heel of the man. Because we were all alone in the world, even though all animals love us, because there was no one like us. And God created the woman from the man, and I gave the woman a certain type of metaphysical power over the man that to this very day we struggle with from day to day. And so, again, can I prove that all these things that we've seen are actually crypto disguised blood sacrifice in the entertainment industry? Can't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, but I suspect it so strongly, I don't lose much sleep thinking about it. So, what I'm saying is, Satan is back, Druidism is back, and Halloween is the high holy day of these horrible, terrible things. So, we shouldn't be celebrating them, we should be exposing them. Now, next week when we conclude, we're going to look at the verses that support and lay out support for each one of the propositions that I made. Demons are real, devils are real, warlocks are real, witches are real, ghosts are real, zombies even are real because they are in the Bible and they are coming. They are being held back by the restraining power of the Holy Spirit, but that restraining power is about to be removed, particularly when the rapture occurs, and then all hell is going to break loose on the earth. And every day on earth is going to be Halloween all day long, and it's not going to be pretty. So, with that, Albert closes up in prayer.
Every day is going to be Halloween, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
But not the good one.
Dear Lord, thank you for this Bible study, dear Jesus. Thank you for the knowledge and wisdom imparted upon us, dear Lord. Lord, please bless us and bring us back next week at the same time, place, and protect us this week, dear Jesus. Protect us and keep us in your word, dear Lord, and keep us safe, dear Lord. In your holy name, amen, amen.
All right, I'm thinking that Steve would knock us out there.